The large hall was quiet, waiting. Light from a big blue star came through the wide window. It lit up the many students who were there to learn. They were not all the same. Some had smooth green skin and big black eyes. Others had hard shells and many legs that clicked on the floor. A tall being with thin arms and feathers that changed color sat near the front.
In the middle of all these strange and wonderful forms sat two people who looked very plain.
Their names were Ji-hyun and Min-soo. Ji-hyun was a young woman with dark hair and calm eyes. She watched everything with a quiet interest. Next to her, Min-soo was looking at a small screen in his hand, trying to hide it. He was more interested in new tech than in old history. At the front of the room, a man stood up. He was Professor Kim. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with great importance. He looked over the room and everyone became still. "Welcome," he said, his voice clear and strong. "Today we finish our talks on the great dangers of the past. We have spoken about the Solara, who could cut through worlds. We have learned about the Cathar, who shared one mind and could break the will of others. But today we talk about the worst of them all, the most dangerous being the galaxy has ever known." A picture appeared in the air above him. It was a creature that made several students gasp or make sounds of fear. It was long, like a worm, but covered in sharp, hard pieces. It had not one mouth, but several, each one ringed with teeth that looked like broken glass. Its eyes were small and showed no thought, only a deep, endless hunger. "This," Professor Kim said, his voice low and serious, "is the vermis demon, the demon worm." He let the scary picture hang in the air for a moment. Ji-hyun did not look away. She just watched, her face calm. "The demon worm was not like other hunters," the professor continued. "It did not kill just to eat. It killed for the joy of it. It loved to see other beings suffer. It did not just use its own teeth and claws. It made its whole world into a weapon. The plants, the other animals, even the air and water could bring a painful end. Its only goal was to rule, to destroy, to spread." He changed the picture. Now it showed a star map. A red line moved from one star to another. When the old ones, the progenitor races, found them, a great war started, a war that burned across hundreds of stars. The progenitors were wise and powerful, but against the demon worm they almost lost. In the end, they had to make a terrible choice. They used weapons of great power on the demon worm's home planet. They burned its world clean of all life. They put a fence around its star system so no one could ever go there again. It was a sad victory, but a necessary one. The galaxy was made safe. Professor Kim looked around the room. He saw the fear and respect in the students' faces. He felt the weight of his own story. "So we remember the vermis demon," he said, his voice becoming soft. "We remember it not to be afraid, but to be thankful. Thankful that such a horror is gone. The most dangerous species to ever live is no more. It is extinct. The universe is a better place without it." He gave a small final nod. The lesson was over. A wave of relief moved through the room. The students began to gather their things. The sound of clicks and soft talks filled the air. Min-soo finally put his screen away. "Well, that was a cheerful way to end the week," he said to Ji-hyun. "I am glad I did not live back then." "That thing sounds nasty." Ji-hyun was slow to move. She was still looking at the front of the room where the picture of the scary creature had been. Her brow was slightly furrowed, as if she was trying to solve a difficult problem. "Something is wrong," she said quietly. "Wrong? What do you mean?" Min-soo asked. "The professor is the expert on this. He has written many books." "I know," Ji-hyun said. "But his story, there are holes in it." Most of the students were already leaving. Professor Kim was putting his own notes away, pleased with his talk. Then he saw a movement. A single hand was raised in the crowd. It was Ji-hyun's. Professor Kim was a little annoyed. His talk was perfect. It was finished. He did not want questions now. But he was a teacher, so he had to allow them. "Yes, student Ji-hyun? You have a question?" he asked, his voice a little short. Ji-hyun stood up. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were still. All around her, the few remaining students stopped to watch. The tall being with feathers turned its head. The clicking sounds from a shelled student stopped. "Professor," Ji-hyun began, her voice clear, "your talk was very interesting." "Thank you," Professor Kim said, waiting for the real question. "You described the home of the vermis demon," she continued. "This world that was made into a weapon. What was its name?" Professor Kim blinked. This was a silly question. A small detail. "Its name?" he repeated. "It did not have a name. The demon worms did not use language. They did not name their rivers or their stars. They only knew hunger and anger. In our records, it is only called by a number. XG734. Ji-hyun took a slow, deep breath. This was the moment. She could feel Min-soo staring at her, his eyes wide. "With respect, sir," she said, and her voice was now stronger. It carried across the quiet room. "That is not true." The world had a name. A small laugh came from Professor Kim. "Student Ji-hyun, the records are very clear. There is no name." "The records are wrong," Ji-hyun said, and her words fell like stones in the room. The planet was not a nameless rock. It was called Earth. For a second, there was complete silence. Then the room broke into a wave of sound. Quiet talks, shocked clicks, confused whistles. Professor Kim's face turned from amusement to anger. "Earth? That is a foolish story. Your own people's stories say that is your lost home. This is just human pride. You want to connect yourself to this great history?" Ji-hyun did not back down. "It is not pride, sir. It is the truth. And the Vermis demon, it was not the great danger you described. Not the danger. It almost broke the galaxy. It was not the top of the food chain," Ji-hyun said, her words cutting through the noise. The room became quiet again, everyone listening. The demon worm was not the ruler of that world. It was a pet, a thing made by another species, a species that liked to change the world around them, a species that made new plants, new animals for work, for food, and sometimes for fun. The Vermis demon was one of their projects, a project that went very wrong. Professor Kim just stared, his mouth open a little. He could not believe what he was hearing. "The dominant species," Ji-hyun said, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of every strange and alien face. "The ones who made the demon worm, the ones who fought your progenitor race to a stop. They called themselves humans." She let her words hang in the air. The silence was now heavy and thick. "And we," she said, finally looking back at the shocked Professor Kim, "are their children." The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. It was a heavy, thick thing, like a blanket smothering all sound. The gentle hum of the starbase's life support systems, which was always there, seemed to have vanished. Every eye, every sensory organ, was locked onto Ji-hyun. The tall, feathered being had stopped its subtle color shifts and stood perfectly still. The student with the chitinous shell had frozen mid-step, one leg still raised. Professor Kim's face had gone through several changes. First, there was pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth had actually fallen open. Then confusion knitted his brows together. Now a deep red anger was rising from his neck to his cheeks. He looked less like a respected scholar and more like a man who had been personally insulted. A pet?" he finally sputtered, the word exploding in the quiet room. "You stand there in my classroom and you tell me the most feared creature in galactic history was a domesticated animal? A bioengineered companion species that developed pack-hunting instincts beyond its design parameters," Ji-hyun corrected him, her voice still calm, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of her desk. "They were bred for loyalty and protective behavior. The aggression was an unintended side effect." A wave of nervous chitters and clicks rippled through the non-human students. The concept of breeding a predator was alien and terrifying to most of them. "This is nonsense!" Professor Kim slammed his hand on the podium. The sound made several students jump. "This is human arrogance of the highest order. You are a young species, newcomers to a civilized galaxy. You find a great, tragic story, and you want to insert yourselves into the center of it, to make yourselves important." Min-soo, who had been staring at Ji-hyun as if she'd grown a second head, finally found his voice. "Ji-hyun," he whispered urgently, tugging on her sleeve. "What are you doing? Sit down. You're going to get expelled." Ji-hyun gently pulled her arm away, her eyes never leaving the professor. "It's not about importance, sir. It's about truth. The records you study were written by the progenitors. They wrote the history. What if they lied?" "They had no reason to lie," Professor Kim insisted. "They had every reason," Ji-hyun countered. "Think about the story. A single monstrous species so lethal it nearly defeated the Great Progenitor Alliance. It's a simple, clean enemy. It's a monster you can defeat and feel good about. But what if the truth was more complicated? What if the enemy wasn't a simple monster? What if they were a people who built cities, who created art, who loved their families, and who also, when pushed into a corner, created the most effective biological weapons the galaxy has ever seen. The idea was so vast, so unsettling, that the room seemed to hold its breath. The progenitors were the revered ancient founders of galactic civilization. The idea that their greatest historical moment was a lie was unthinkable. "You have proof?" a new voice asked. It was the tall, feathered student. Its voice was a soft, melodic whistle, but it carried clearly. "Such a claim requires evidence beyond the stories of your tribe." Before Ji-hyun could answer, the lecture hall doors hissed open. Two figures stood there. One was a stern-looking man in the sharp uniform of the Galactic Council's historical archive. His name was Kwan. Everyone on the starbase knew him. He was in charge of preserving the past, and he did not like disruptions. Beside him was a tall, slender being with gray skin and large, dark eyes, a direct descendant of the progenitor race. Its name was unpronounceable to most, so it went by the designation P-77. The air grew even colder. Kwan's eyes scanned the room and landed on Ji-hyun. "We received an automated alert of a significant historical discrepancy being discussed in this forum," Kwan said, his voice like grinding stones. "Professor Kim, care to explain?" Professor Kim, flustered and angry, pointed a finger at Ji-hyun. "This student has made a wild, baseless accusation. She claims the Vermis demon was a human creation and that the progenitor records are a fabrication." P-77 made a soft, guttural sound. Its large eyes fixed on Ji-hyun. "The progenitor records are flawless. They are the foundation upon which our present peace is built. To question them is to question stability itself." Ji-hyun felt a chill, but she stood her ground. She looked at Kwan. "Sir, I am not questioning out of malice. I am questioning because the pieces do not fit. You have the catalog number for the planet, XG734. Can you pull up the original, unedited visual scans? The ones from just after the quarantine was established?" Kwan studied her for a long moment. He was a man of data, of cold, hard facts. The emotional outrage of Professor Kim meant little to him. The girl's request was simple, and it was one he could easily fulfill. "Very well," he said finally. "We will do this. We will look at the data, and when it shows you are wrong, you will formally apologize to Professor Kim and this entire class, and you will be barred from further historical studies. Do you understand?" Min-soo winced. Ji-hyun simply nodded. "I understand." Kwan took out a small device and projected a screen into the air. His fingers flew across it. The image of the terrifying Vermis demon was replaced by a new hologram. It showed a planet. It was a dull, lifeless gray-brown, scarred with countless craters. The atmosphere was a thin, sickly yellow haze. It was a dead world. A tomb. "This," Kwan said, his voice flat, "is XG734. As the records show, a scoured world, a monument to the price of peace." A few students nodded. It was exactly what the professor had described. "Now," Ji-hyun said, stepping closer to the hologram, "the official record states that the progenitors used planetary bombardment to break the crust and ignite the atmosphere. The scans are a composite taken after this event. But the raw data from the initial survey probes, it's still in the archive, isn't it? Buried in the deep storage logs." Kwan's eyes narrowed. "That data is corrupted and fragmented. It is not used for a reason." "Please," Ji-hyun said. "Run a geological reversion analysis. Filter for bedrock mineral signatures. Ignore the surface bombardment data. Look for what was there before the war." Professor Kim scoffed. "This is a waste of time." "Do it," P-77 whistled softly, its dark eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "Let the data silence her." Kwan sighed, but his fingers moved again. He input the commands. The hologram of the dead world flickered. Lines of code scrolled down the side of the image. The room watched, utterly captivated. At first, nothing happened. The gray, dead world just hung there. Then, a faint blue patch appeared near the top of the planet, then a streak of green along the equator. The computer was slowly, painstakingly peeling back the layers of destruction. "It's just atmospheric artifact," Professor Kim muttered, but he didn't sound sure anymore. More blue appeared. Vast, deep blue covering whole hemispheres. The green spread, forming familiar, beautiful shapes, the outlines of continents. The sickly yellow haze dissolved, replaced by the pure white of healthy cloud formations. In less than a minute, the transformation was complete. The dead gray rock was gone. In its place, hanging in the center of the lecture hall, was a stunningly beautiful planet. A marble of brilliant blue, swirled with white, and dotted with lush green and brown landmasses. It was a world every human child knew from their storybooks. It was a world they dreamed of, a mythical home they thought was lost to legend. A single soft sob broke the silence. It was Minsu. He was staring at the planet, tears in his eyes. Ji-hyun's own voice was thick with emotion when she spoke, but it was clear and strong. "That," she said, pointing at the beautiful blue world, "is not XG734. That is Earth." The beautiful blue planet hung in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. The sight of it was like a physical blow. It was so full of life, so different from the dead rock in the official records. It was a world you could imagine loving. It was not a monster's den. Professor Kim was the first to break. He took a step back, his face pale. "No," he whispered. "This is a trick. A human trick. You have altered the data." Kwon the archivist was staring at the planet with a hard, focused expression. He was a man of facts, and the facts had just changed in front of him. His fingers flew over his device again, running diagnostics. "The data stream is verified. It is the original unaltered feed from the probe Forerunner 12. The reversion analysis is sound. This is what the planet looked like before the bombardment." The progenitor descendant P77 made a low, humming sound. Its large, dark eyes were wide, reflecting the blue of the holographic Earth. It did not look angry anymore. It looked confused. This was not in its people's history. Ji-hyun let them look. She let the image of Earth sink into their minds. She saw Minsu wiping his eyes, unable to look away from the homeworld he had only heard about in stories. "The planet is beautiful," Kwon admitted, his voice grudging, "but this proves nothing about your larger claim. A beautiful world can still produce a lethal species. The Vermis demon could have been its ruler." "The Vermis demon was a surface-dwelling predator," Ji-hyun said. She walked closer to the hologram, her hand reaching out as if she could touch the oceans. "It lived in the dirt and the caves. It was an animal. A dangerous one, yes, but just an animal. The progenitors never looked deeper. They saw the teeth on the surface and they bombed the whole planet. They never asked what built the cities." "Cities?" Professor Kim's voice was shaky. "There were no cities. The scan showed no structures." "Because you're only looking for structures you recognize," Ji-hyun replied. She turned to Kwon. "The deep core geological scans. The ones that look for mineral deposits. Can you pull them up? Focus on the land masses. Look for concentrations of refined metals and complex alloys deep underground. Look for the patterns of foundations." Kwon, now completely absorbed in the puzzle, nodded. He entered new commands. The view of the whole Earth shifted, zooming in on one of the larger continents. The surface colors faded, replaced by a heat map of mineral and metal signatures. The image was a mess of colors made chaotic by the layer of planetary damage on top. "Filter out the top 5 kilometers, Ji-hyun instructed, her voice calm and sure. "Remove the debris from the bombardment. Look at the bedrock level." The hologram flickered. The chaotic colors smoothed out. And then they saw it. Beneath the scars of war, a ghostly skeleton appeared. It was a vast, intricate network of lines and squares, long, straight lines that could only be roads, concentrated boxes of metal and concrete that could only be the foundations of enormous buildings. There were patterns of circular deposits where deep tunnels had been dug for transport systems. It was the unmistakable footprint of a vast, planet-wide civilization. The patterns spread across every continent. It was a web of intelligent design, buried but not erased. "The progenitors bombed the surface into glass," Ji-hyun said softly. "They melted the mountains and boiled the oceans. But they could not erase the roots. They could not erase what was buried deep in the stone." P77 took a step forward, its slender gray hand pointing at the network of lines. What is this? What kind of species builds so deep? A species that plans for the long term, Ji-hyun answered. A species that knows how to build things to last. A species that loves its world enough to build into it, not just on it. She paused, letting them take it in. The demon worms didn't build this. They didn't build anything. They hunted. They nested. They did not refine metal or lay out city grids. The evidence was now undeniable. The planet was not a primitive death world. It was the home of an advanced, building, thinking species. Professor Kim sank into his chair behind the podium. He looked old. His whole life's work, the history he had taught for decades, was crumbling around him. But the war, he mumbled. The progenitors said it was a war for survival against the vermis demon. It was a war for survival, Ji-hyun agreed. But not in the way you think. The progenitors arrived. They saw the demon worms and probably lost a scout party to them. They panicked. They judged the whole planet by its most dangerous animal. They issued an ultimatum to the dominant species. Surrender the planet for cleansing or be destroyed. She looked around the room, at the faces of the alien students. What would you do if someone came to your world, saw a dangerous predator and said they were going to burn your entire home to kill it? Would you let them? A slow understanding was dawning in the room. The story was flipping. The heroes were becoming invaders. The monsters were becoming victims. The humans did not surrender their world, Ji-hyun continued. They fought. They used every tool they had. They used the demon worms, yes, as biological weapons, turning the progenitors' fear against them. They used the plants, the bacteria, the very environment. They fought a war that was so terrible, so costly for the advanced progenitors, that the only way the progenitors could claim any kind of victory was to make the planet uninhabitable. They chose to destroy a world rather than admit they were losing a war to its people. She turned to P-77, and after it was over, to save face to explain why they had to destroy such a beautiful, advanced world, they created a lie. They erased the builders, the artists, the farmers. They made the whole story about the monster. It was easier. It was cleaner. The galaxy could understand a monster. They couldn't understand a people who were both creators and destroyers. Kwon stared at the ghostly image of the buried cities. He was a historian. His whole life was about preserving truth, and he was looking at the biggest lie his people had ever told. The most lethal species is gone, he whispered, repeating Professor Kim's words from the lecture. But now the words had a new terrible meaning. Ji-hyun shook her head, her eyes still on the blue planet. No, sir. The most lethal species didn't live on the surface. They lived in the cities beneath it. And we, she said, finally turning to look at him, are their children, and we are still here. The archive chamber was deep in the heart of the starbase. It was a quiet, cold place. The air smelled of old metal and ozone. The walls were lined with glowing data spheres, each one holding a piece of the galaxy's history. The hologram of Earth was still shining in the middle of the room. The ghostly lines of its buried cities were a silent proof of Ji-hyun's story. Kwon, the archivist, paced slowly around the image. His face was serious. Professor Kim sat on a low bench, his head in his hands. He was a broken man. The progenitor, P-77, stood perfectly still, its large eyes unblinking. The structural evidence is undeniable, Kwon said finally, stopping his pacing. A civilization of significant scale and technological achievement existed on XG-734. On Earth. He said the name carefully, as if testing a strange new word. But it does not prove the humans were the lethal ones, P-77 whistled softly. Its voice was like wind through dead trees. The builders of cities could have been a separate, peaceful species. The vermis demon could have been their enemy too. The progenitors may have arrived to help. Ji-hyun had expected this. It was hard to change a story that was so old. She reached into the small bag she carried. She took out a transparent container. Inside was a small, wrinkled red plant. This is from my personal garden, she said, placing the container on a table. It is a piece of my heritage. A plant from Earth, we call it a pepper. Min-soo looked confused. Ji-hyun, this is not the time for a cooking lesson. Kwon and P-77 looked at the small plant. Not understanding. Ji-hyun nodded to Kwon. Scan it, please, run a full biochemical analysis. Kwon sighed, but he took out his scanner. A thin blue light passed over the container. Almost immediately, a sharp warning beep came from the device. Kwan's eyes widened. He looked at the readings on his screen. This is registering as a potent neurotoxin, he exclaimed, taking a step back from the table. It is a weapon. You have brought a biological weapon into a secure archive. P-77 hissed and also stepped back, its gray skin seeming to grow paler. Ji-hyun did not move. She looked at the little red pepper with something like affection. It is not a weapon. It is a spice. We eat it. We put it in our food for flavor. We enjoy the burning sensation it causes in our mouths. The two men and the progenitor stared at her in pure disbelief. You consume a neurotoxin? For enjoyment? Kwan asked, his voice full of horror. Every day, Ji-hyun said simply. Many humans do. It makes the food more interesting. She then turned to the main archive console. May I? Kwan, too stunned to refuse, gave a slow nod. Ji-hyun's fingers moved over the console. She pulled up data files. Let me show you more. This is a list of common Terran flora and fauna from our historical records. A list appeared on the main screen. Caffeine, she read, pointing. A powerful insecticide produced by a plant. We grind its seeds and drink it with hot water every morning to help us wake up. She scrolled down. Tetrodotoxin, one of the most deadly natural poisons known. It is found in a type of earthfish. We used to consider that fish a great delicacy. Chefs trained for years to prepare it safely. People would pay large amounts of money to eat a piece of this deadly fish. She scrolled again. Ethanol, a waste product of fermentation. It is a poison that damages the brain and body. We discovered how to make it in large quantities and drank it at social gatherings to relax and feel happy. With each example, the atmosphere in the room grew more tense. Professor Kim looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This was not the fear of a story. This was the fear of something real and incomprehensible. You see? Ji-hyun said, turning to face them. You called the vermis demon lethal because it had sharp teeth and a nasty temper. But that is a simple, childish kind of danger. You can see it coming. She pointed at the screen, at the list of poisons and toxins. Humanity's lethality was never so simple. We did not just fight our enemies with claws. We fought them with chemistry, with biology. We looked at a plant that could kill most other species and we said, this will make my soup taste better. We looked at a fish that could stop an alien's heart in seconds and we said, I will risk my life for the perfect bite. Our entire planet was a trial of survival. Every day was a challenge. The air, the water, the plants, the animals, everything was trying to kill us. And we did not just survive it. We mastered it. We tamed it. We consumed it. We enjoyed it. She looked at P-77. The progenitors saw the demon worm and were terrified. They were right to be. But they never looked past it. They never saw the species that kept the demon worm in a cage. The species that walked through fields of poisonous flowers and picked the most beautiful ones to give to someone they loved. The species that could create a symphony out of sounds and a painting out of colors, and then turn around and engineer a virus that could target a specific genetic line. Her voice was quiet but absolute. The demon worm was a weapon, yes, but it was a crude one. A hammer, humanity. We were the hand that held the hammer. We were the mind that decided where and when to swing it. The progenitors didn't go to war with a monster. They went to war with a force of nature. They went to war with a people who had spent their entire history learning how to win, no matter the cost. And the only way they could win was to blow up the playground. The room was silent again. The little red pepper sat on the table, a small, innocent-looking thing that was more dangerous than it appeared. It was the perfect symbol for Earth. It was the perfect symbol for humanity. Kwan looked from the pepper to the ghostly cities on the hologram. He finally understood. The vermis demon was not the story. It was just the most obvious chapter. The real story was much, much darker, and much more interesting. The most lethal species was not the one with the biggest teeth. It was the one that could look at poison and call it lunch. The silence in the archive was heavy. The truth was out. The planet was Earth. The humans were the builders, not the monsters. The little red pepper sat on the table as proof of their strange and terrible strength. But for Minsu, something still felt unfinished. He was a tech student, not a historian. He thought in signals and codes, not in stories. While the others were staring at the hologram of Earth, he was looking at Kwan's main console. A small blinking light in the corner of the screen caught his eye. It was a low-priority data stream marker. something most people would ignore. It was the kind of signal used for long-range, non-urgent communications. The kind of signal that could get lost in the background noise of the galaxy for centuries. "Sir," Minsu said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Quan and Ji-hyun turned to look at him. "This signal, where is it from?" Quan glanced at the screen, annoyed by the interruption. "That is nothing. A ghost signal. An old, repeating broadcast from a dead system. It is just background static. We have had it for generations." Minsu's heart beat a little faster. "Which dead system?" Quan was about to dismiss him again, but he saw the look on Minsu's face. He input a command. A star map appeared. A line drew itself from their current location to a distant, blinking dot. The dot was in a sector of space that was marked in red. "A quarantine sector, the Sol system." "It's from Earth," Minsu whispered. Professor Kim looked up, his eyes tired. "More ghosts?" "It's not a ghost," Minsu said, his fingers already moving over the console, copying the signal data. "It's a message." P-77 made a sharp, disapproving sound. "The progenitor records state all human transmissions ceased after the final bombardment. This is just random noise from the destruction. Destruction doesn't send a structured, repeating signal on a focused bandwidth," Minsu said, his tech knowledge giving him confidence. "This is ordered. This is made." He worked quickly, pulling the signal into a separate analysis program. The data was old and corrupted, but its pattern was clear. It was a loop, a message set to repeat sent out into the darkness. "It's heavily encrypted with some kind of ancient code," Minsu muttered. "But the carrier wave is simple. It's a greeting protocol." He ran a decryption sequence. The archive's powerful computers chewed through the old code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a screen filled with simple, clean data. First, a series of numbers. Prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. A universal language of mathematics. A way to say, we are intelligent. We can count, then simple chemical formulas. The building blocks of life, water, carbon dioxide. The message was introducing its senders. Then sounds began to play. A slow, rhythmic thumping. A heartbeat. Then the soft, joyful sound of a mother's laughter. Then many voices speaking in many different ancient languages. The words were unclear, but the tone was friendly, curious. Finally, images appeared, a man and a woman standing side by side. They were not soldiers. They were not scientists in lab coats. They were just people. They smiled. There were pictures of children eating food, of animals playing, of great works of art and architecture. There was music, a sad, beautiful melody from a single-string instrument, then a powerful, complex piece with many instruments playing together. It was the Voyager Golden Record, a time capsule, a message in a bottle, thrown into the cosmic ocean by a people full of hope. The archive chamber was filled with the sounds of a dead world, the laughter of its children, the music of its artists, the beating of its heart. Ji-hyun watched, tears streaming silently down her face. This was not the story of a lethal species. This was a love letter to the universe. P-77 was trembling. This is a cognitive hazard. A trick to lower defenses. "It's not a trick," Ji-hyun said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's who we were. It's who we still are. This was our first message to the stars. We didn't send pictures of our weapons. We didn't send threats. We sent a heartbeat. We sent laughter. We sent our music. We said hello." She turned to the progenitor, her eyes shining. "Your ancestors found this message. They heard this heartbeat. They saw these peaceful people. And then they saw the world we lived on. They saw the demon worms and the poisonous plants. They saw the contradiction. They couldn't understand it. A species that could create such beautiful things and also create such terrible dangers. It scared them more than any monster ever could. A monster is simple. You can kill a monster. But what do you do with a people like us?" The truth was now complete and devastating. The progenitors had not just erased humanity's cities and its history. They had erased its humanity. They had taken this beautiful, hopeful message and classified it as a weapon. They had buried it because it was the one thing their story could not explain. The progenitors could justify bombing a planet of monsters. They could not justify bombing a planet that sent out pictures of smiling children and the sound of a mother's laugh. Quan looked at the images of the happy people on the screen. He listened to the beautiful, strange music. He thought of the little red pepper. He thought of the buried cities. He finally understood the full, terrifying picture. The Vermis demon was a lie, yes, but the deeper lie was about humanity itself. The progenitors had not been afraid of humanity's lethality. They had been afraid of its complexity. They were afraid because they could not answer one simple question. Were these people angels or demons? The answer, the evidence now showed, was that they were both, and that was the most frightening thing of all. The most lethal species was not the one that could destroy a world. It was the one that could create a beautiful message for the universe while living on a world that was trying to kill them. It was the species that held a heartbeat in one hand and a poisonous pepper in the other, and saw no contradiction. The message continued to play, a ghost from a murdered world, finally being heard. The sounds of the ancient message filled the archive. The soft music, the laughing children, the steady heartbeat. These sounds did not belong in this cold metal room. They were warm and alive. They painted a picture of a people the galaxy had never known. A people who were curious and kind. A people who looked at the stars and thought of friends. The images of the man and woman smiling hung in the air next to the terrifying picture of the Vermis demon. The two images did not match. They could not both be true. But they were. Quan, the archivist, looked from one picture to the other. His mind, which loved order and facts, was struggling. He had spent his life protecting a history that was a lie. He felt a great weight on his shoulders. Professor Kim sat on the floor, his head bowed. He was not angry anymore. He was ashamed. He had taught the lie. He had made it sound brave and noble. The progenitor, P-77, was the most changed. Its tall body seemed to sag. Its large dark eyes were fixed on the image of the smiling woman. It was seeing a ghost, an ancestor it never knew it had killed. The progenitors. P-77 whistled, its voice thin and weak. They were not heroes. They were afraid. Ji-hyun wiped the tears from her face. The sound of her homeworld's heartbeat was the most beautiful and the most painful thing she had ever heard. Everyone is afraid of what they don't understand, she said softly. Min-soo stood by the console, his hand resting on it. He had found the message. He had given voice to the dead. He felt proud and sad at the same time. The silence returned as the message loop ended and began again with the simple prime numbers. The quiet in the room was different now. It was not a silence of shock or anger. It was a silence of thought, a silence of understanding. Quan was the first to move. He walked slowly to the center of the room. He stood between the image of the demon worm and the image of Earth. He looked at Ji-hyun. His face was serious, but his eyes were not cold anymore. "Student Ji-hyun," he began, his voice formal. "The historical record must be corrected. This." He gestured to the peaceful message. "This is the truth. The progenitors were wrong. We have been wrong for a very long time." He then turned to P-77. "Your people's greatest achievement was built on a lie. I am sorry." P-77 bowed its head slightly. It was a gesture of deep shame and regret. Then Quan looked back at Ji-hyun. His gaze was intense. "But this leaves us with a problem. A very big problem." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The galaxy believes the most lethal species is gone. They believe the great threat is extinct. But they are wrong." He pointed a finger, not at the demon worm, but at Ji-hyun. "You are the heirs of the demon's masters. The most lethal species is not gone. It is standing in this room." His words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact. A cold, hard fact. Professor Kim looked up, his eyes wide with a new fear. He saw it now. The truth was not just about the past. It was about the present. It was about the two human students in front of him. Min-soo shifted nervously. Ji-hyun, however, did not flinch. She shook her head slowly. "You are still missing the point, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You are still defining us by the same old story. You are just changing the name of the monster." She stepped forward, away from the console, towards the middle of the room. She held up her hands. They were ordinary human hands. They had 5 fingers. They could make a fist. But they could also open up. Lethality was just a tool for us, she said. A consequence. Our world was hard. We had to be hard to survive. But that is not who we are. That is not what we chose to be. She looked at her own hands, these hands that could make weapons. They also built homes for our families. They held our children. They painted pictures. The mind that could engineer a terrible creature like the demon worm. That same mind also wrote poems. It composed that music you are hearing. It looked at the stars and wanted to say hello. She turned to include Minsu and by extension all humans. The progenitors were so afraid of our teeth that they never saw our smile. They were so scared of what we could destroy that they never saw what we could build. She looked at Quan, then at P-77, and finally at the broken Professor Kim. The progenitors are gone. They are dust. Their empire fell. But we are still here. She said it with a simple, powerful certainty. We survived your war. We survived the destruction of our world. We crawled from the ashes and we walked among the stars again. We came to your star bases. We learned your languages. We did not come for revenge. We came to find a new home. She took a final deep breath, her message clear. So do not make the same mistake they did. Do not look at us and see only a threat. Do not define us by the worst we could have been. Define us by the people we are. Look at what we have done since we returned. We have built. We have learned. We have made friends. She lowered her hands. Our return is not a threat. It is a promise. It is a promise that life is stubborn. It is a promise that even in the darkest times, hope and kindness can survive. We are not the most lethal species. We are the ones who never give up. The archive was silent once more. But this silence was different. It was not heavy. It was light. It was the silence of a new beginning. Quan looked at Ji-hyun, this young woman from a dead world, and he saw not a monster and not a victim, but a person. A strong, resilient person. He gave a slow, respectful nod. P-77 looked at the image of the smiling human woman from the message. Then it looked at Ji-hyun. It saw the same hope in her eyes. It made a soft, melodic sound, a sound of acceptance. Professor Kim slowly got to his feet. He walked over to Ji-hyun. He did not look like a proud professor anymore. He looked like a student. Teach us, he said, his voice humble. Teach us the real history. Help us correct the records. Ji-hyun smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. It was the smile from the message. It was the smile of Earth. Okay, she said. I will. The ghost had been heard. The lie was broken. The galaxy had just become a much larger and much more interesting place.